Well, I just watched Trump's speech from the White House on immigration, and I wanted to give you my immediate feedback and reaction. Um, One of the things that I noticed about the speech today, in addition to the substance of it, which was reported by media ahead of time, was also, and one of the things that I've noticed is whenever, first of all, Trump's really in his element when he's giving a speech to a live audience with a crowd and everything, but he tends to be more awkward and uncomfortable when he has a speech written for him. And that's doubly true when it's a speech that's written for him that is not in his own voice, and probably in all likelihood does not really kind of contain or reflect the spirit and emotion that Trump feels on that subject. And that's certainly what happened this evening. I don't think the compromise that Trump proposed is his idea of a coherent immigration plan. And if you look at the substance or the tone and text of the speech, which emphasize to a great extent unity and compromise and common sense and bipartisanship, these may be virtues, but they're not virtues that are particularly associated with Trump's brand. I mean, to the contrary, if you look at right from the beginning how Trump is engaged on the immigration issue, his strategy has basically been to do a couple things. One, first of all, elevate immigration to be a number one priority for the country. This is something that other presidents, whatever their views on immigration, have not really done. Number two, to really treat it not as a opportunity for compromise or so forth, which is the McCain approach, the Jeb Bush approach, the Marco Rubio approach. He really made it a wedge issue and a cultural wedge issue. And he talked about it in a deliberately partisan, inflammatory way in order to draw clear lines around the issue. And then he harped on the border wall in particular, not so much as a policy endeavor in and of itself, but the border wall really became a symbol of what the immigration issue and Trump's view on the immigration issue really was, which wasn't only about border control and security, though it was that, but it was also very much a cultural issue meant to appeal to the identitarian anxiety of much of his base and much of his support. Now, the notable thing that I found tonight about Trump's speech was that even when he did go to bat for his original vision or intention on immigration, about border security and so forth, he talked about it in I thought, like a much more of a technocratic policy kind of a way than he has in the past. This is the language more of a think tank scholar who shares his views rather than a populist president. And I mean, and that's notable because I think if you accept my analysis that the border wall and the immigration issue is not simply about security, it's also about concerns about the demographic makeup of our society, many of these identitarian issues. Trump really didn't throw a bone to those issues, as far as I heard, or insofar as he did, they weren't all that clear. Now, I think this is actually remarkable. And, I think most of the commentary you're going to see, most of the commentary that I've seen so far is analyzing Trump's speech in the context of what it means for the shutdown and today's moment. But I want to, in this video, take a longer view and offer a thesis, which is that with this speech, against the backdrop of this speech, I think Trump's legacy on the immigration issue could very well be that he opens the door to a genuine, if not quite open borders regime in America, one that's substantially more liberal than what anyone envisioned. And I say that because this trope of open borders, there are obviously libertarians and people on the very far left who actually support open borders. But for the most part, the way Trump and others use open borders, it's not a literal thing. It's more of a straw man argument meant to demonize or make the other side look more extreme than they are. I don't think Nancy Pelosi, Schumer, or the vast majority of Democrats in Congress today actually favor open borders. I mean, even I mean, they're certainly not saying it, but I haven't seen a lot of evidence that that's actually their view. But one of the consequences of the Trump presidency has been that the politics of immigration and the extent to which there's an emerging consensus on immigration, the contours of the debate have moved considerably. And I think this is a real change, because if you look at where the immigration debate was around the time of when the Reagan administration basically declared amnesty and offered a deal and so forth, from the Reagan presidency onward, I think you've in some ways seen, especially in more recent years, a gradual turn, at least on the right and in the Republican Party, away from a pro sort of open borders, immigration-friendly platform. And I think one of the underappreciated anomalies, I think it was a real fluke more than anything, was the fact that we had 8 years of George W. Bush, and then followed by John McCain getting the Republican nomination. I think both of these presidents, both of these candidates, George W. Bush and then John McCain, were actually wildly out of step from their base on immigration. It just so happened that for other reasons they were able to take control of the Republican Party. And actually, if you look at the Mitt Romney's 2012 platform, I don't actually think he was a border hawk or an immigration hawk. I don't think he would campaign as one. But if you actually look at the text of his platform on immigration, the plan that he actually ran on, it was a very, very tough plan on immigration, very tough on the border. And that's why, the few people who actually paid attention to it, like Ann Coulter, for example, who's long been a champion of tougher immigration and so forth, she endorsed Romney enthusiastically, not because she thought he was a genuine, but because of the plan he laid out on the border and on immigration. And just given the kind of politician Romney is, I mean, he has no seeming convictions. He just sort of adopts and changes course and flip-flops and does whatever he needs to in the moment. The fact that he and his team decided that it was politically advantageous to take that hard line of a position on the border was an indication of where the party was going. And the Trump campaign of 2016 really was the climax of this anti-immigration fervor. Now, I mean, I think if Trump had if he had campaigned on the kind of plan that he outlined today, especially done so in a sober tone, I mean, he may not have won he may not have gotten the Republican nomination, but if he had, and this is the tone and the policy that he had campaigned on as a general election candidate, I actually think that he could have gotten some variant of this kind of a compromise through Congress. I even think it would have been possible if he had done that for the first 2 years of his presidency, if he had right away tried to lay the groundwork for it and worked with a unified Republican majority to do that. The problem for the president is that he didn't do that. He ended up using, basically spending his capital on two things. One, he spent it on tax reform, which, whatever virtues there are of the plan, didn't really get the political benefit that he desired. And then the other thing that he spent his capital on was, frankly, just his own behavior. I mean, a lot of people ask the question of what will it take for Republicans or the American people to turn against Trump for his behavior. But David Frum and others have made this point that Trump actually is not a Teflon president. He's far from a Teflon president in the sense that even with the kind of economy that he's presided over for the past 2 years, his approval ratings have never really cracked 50%, which I think would not have been the case with any other president with these kind of economic numbers. So what Trump basically did for the first 2 years of his presidency is that he basically sort of not only did he preside over an increasingly unpopular presidency, but he also, in the process, diminished much of the political capital and much of the support that he might have otherwise gotten behind the initiatives that he actually cares about. Now come to the present time, which is where we're now in this position where Trump decided to shut down the government over this immigration issue, he decided to do so at a time when his approval numbers already were not looking good, when he had just suffered a historic defeat in the midterm elections. And he's now basically created a situation where he doesn't really have as much control and dominance over the Republican Party as he had going into his presidency. But he's now created a dynamic where Pelosi and the Democrats are basically, they have a total mandate to basically stonewall here, not go for a compromise on immigration, even one that they might have supported at an earlier point. And they're being rewarded for that, because if you look at the politics of the past couple of weeks during this shutdown, every day the shutdown has happened, even though both sides are responsible for the gridlock, it's really Trump's approval ratings and Trump's numbers that are hurting more so than the Democratic leadership. So now Trump really owns the consequences of the shutdown here. And so you have a Democratic Party that's basically now united, essentially has a mandate to stonewall, obstruct, basically force a total defeat for Trump on this short-term issue of the shutdown. But the other thing that's now happening here is that as a consequence of the animus toward Trump on the left, those on the fringe end of the immigration debate on the left have an opportunity of the sort that I think they would not have had, either if Hillary Clinton had become president or if Trump had governed in a more popular, moderate way. They now basically have a mandate to go further and further on the immigration point, really wage a civil war within their own party and do so on the offensive. And so I think one of the consequences of this administration are going to be that I think it's very, very unlikely that Trump's going to get reelected. Now, whether that's because he doesn't run again, he gets impeached, or he runs and loses, I mean, I think the outcome is going to be the same, that Trump does not get reelected. And so what you're going to have now is a Democratic president, in all likelihood, coming to power. It's probably going to be a Democrat who is further to the left than what we've seen from Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama or whatever. And they're going to do so after winning the Democratic nomination during a period where this idea of open borders or a much more liberal immigration policy was litigated in the Democratic campaign. And they're going to do so against the backdrop of a dynamic where the whole country watched an American president go to bat for a compromise on DACA, for a relatively moderate policy on the border, and so forth, and get defeated. And I think the message now that any sensible politician has to see is that getting a compromise through on immigration, pushing for one, is not a winning issue. And so you're now basically going to see a political climate here where efforts to govern on immigration in a moderate way have proven time and again to be a losing battle, where it's a wedge issue where both sides are basically doubling down, and it just becomes a messaging war. So I think in all likelihood what you're going to see coming out of this is not only a defeat for Trump on this narrow shutdown issue, but you're also going to see the politics of immigration shift much further to the left. And I think moderates in the Democratic Party are going to be on the defensive. I think people on the far left who really want to push something like an open borders policy are going to have a mandate going into the Democratic primaries now of the sort that they haven't before. All of which could be, ironically enough, that just like we've seen this on other issues. I mean, just like Bill Clinton in many ways consolidated the Reagan Revolution, just like Richard Nixon consolidated support for the Great Society. One of Trump's ironic legacies here may be that he creates a new political mandate, a new governing coalition for a much more open borders type of immigration agenda, which is obviously precisely the opposite of what he intended, what his voters put him into office for, and what he had hoped he wanted to do.